comes from Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. That's not a theory, that's a proven, workable plan, what Ronald Reagan put forward. It wasn't a perfect plan, he did the best that he could, he worked with the Democrat Congress, but it brought forth an economic miracle that is unparalleled in modern times. And those are the same principles that I adopt. And the way that it works in Washington, a president can put forward a plan, but it always gets changed because you've got to work together with both the House and with the Congress. And it's the principles that I'm putting forward. My principles are very different. It's that, first of all, everyone should pay something. Now that even differs with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's plan had what was called the Earned Income Tax Credit, and that took a number of people off of the tax rolls. I believe everyone benefits by this magnificent country. Even if all they can afford is $10, I think they need to pay something, because that's part of the dependency mentality that's been created now in the United States. People think that government should constantly be paying them, rather than people having to contribute to government. It's really reminiscent of what Jack Kennedy said in his inaugural address in the early 1960s, when he said, ask not what your government can do, ask what you can do for your country. I hope I got that right. I think I got that right. I learned that for the first time here in second grade in Seattle, Colorado in my classroom. But the concept is, it isn't about the government supplying us. It's about recognizing that we also have a duty to our government. We're in a very big hole right now. I hope I was able to convey that meaning to all of you. We're in a very big hole. And in order to unbury ourselves out of it, it will require sacrifice from every American. And so people who have been used to for years, never paying anything in taxes, they need to start paying something. That's what has to change. That's a profound difference. And they have to recognize that the federal government won't be their source of supply. So as to specific rates, my plan gives specific principles that I'll abide by. And again, it depends on what the final need is. Because right now, all of us send into Washington $2.2 trillion in revenue. The problem is the federal government spends 100% of that, but they spend 1.5 trillion more. So the question is, do we want to raise more than the 2.2 revenue that we're sending in? Do we want to raise that up so it's another 1.5 trillion? Or do we want to cut back on that spending, and then do we want to raise that 2.2 trillion, or will it be something less? I think when you embrace a pro-growth model like Reagan did in the 80s, the final result is that you grow the economy. And that's the only way we're going to come out of this, is if we grow the economy, because that's what creates jobs, and that's what all of you need. Thanks for asking that question.
All right, Congressman, our next question comes from Amy, here in the back.
Hi.
Hi, Ann.
I think this really goes right off your last question. I'm interested in knowing what you think of federal requirements for the minimum wage, especially when it comes to the fact that people can work extremely hard in this country and work 2 jobs and still not make enough to live.
Well, that's true. That's the argument that we hear from people on why we have to continually raise the minimum wage. So the argument, the logical argument would be, if you can't live on the current minimum wage, then why don't we mandate that it's $20 an hour? Or why don't we mandate that it's $30 an hour? If the goal is that the minimum wage should be $20 an hour or $30 an hour, that would satisfy that basic premise that people need to live on it. Would you agree that that's a good idea?
I think that some changes need to be made.
So what level do you think the minimum wage should be?
$20 an hour, $16 an hour.
16 or $20 an hour? Okay. Anyone think it should be $25 an hour?
No.
Anyone think it should be $30 an hour?
No.
Okay, so you think the top rate is about 20 or 16? No? Anybody else disagree? Okay, well, everyone agrees with you then, I think, that it should be maybe $16 or $20 an hour. Is that true? Everyone agrees that it should be $16 or $20 an hour? No? Do you think lower? Okay, why lower?
All that's going to do is drive inflation up 200% the next day.
Okay, anyone else? Agreed. Okay, let me tell you as a job creator what happens when you have minimum wage increases. Part of the reason why you saw the spike in escalating unemployment this summer was because unskilled workers were not hired by employers. It's a down economy. And employers would like to be able to hire, but they don't have the money to be able to hire because of the cost increases on minimum wage. And what the data show is that when you increase minimum wage, you actually reduce the amount of employment opportunities, especially for entering workers. Because a lot of what happens at the jobs that are entry-level jobs is training. People come into businesses and they're learning on the jobs, whether it's dishwashers, whether it's file clerks, and so employers just don't hire. And so we have higher unemployment. So it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to make sure that people have a wage that they can live on, if that's the goal, then that's one issue. But people ordinarily, they don't stay static. They don't stay in the same position. They'll start out at a certain wage level, and after they've acquired skills, they move up. It isn't static. And so for years, there was no minimum wage, and there was greater levels of full employment because kids would go and start working maybe as a 12-year-old. They'd get a job picking beans in a bean field. I remember picking beans in a bean field for 35 cents a container because it was based upon my productivity. It wasn't a minimum wage, it was what was my productivity. But I was willing to work for it because I was a kid and it provided me with employment. When the federal government comes in and says that an employer must pay a certain amount, then what that means, quite frankly, is you will have more unemployment. And so it depends on what your goal is.
Congresswoman Bachmann, our final question comes from Matt today, or Ben, excuse me.
You said earlier on that you want to reduce corporate taxes in Iowa and yet make a flat rate for everyone in the United States. Why don't you just, like, a lot of those companies are outsourcing us to the United States. When you make it harder for them to do that, to keep more jobs in the United States?
Well, the corporate tax rate today is why a lot of companies are leaving the United States. Because as I had said in my remarks, the average corporate tax rate globally was 47%. It was very high, and the United States was lower. Now, our average corporate tax rate, when you add state and federal, is about 40%, whereas Europe's on average is about 25%, and it's falling. That's the difference. And I will tell you, I went to one manufacturer in West Des Moines, and he told me that he bought a piece of equipment for $1 million. And he has a Des Moines plant, and he has a plant up in Canada. And he said, Michelle, last year, Canada's corporate tax rate was 18%. The United States was 34%, but then you had to add on Iowa's corporate tax rate too. So the corporate tax rate that he paid here in America was so prohibitively high that he said he chose, it killed him, but he sent that piece of equipment to Canada, and when he sent that piece of equipment, he sent jobs up to Canada too. Governor Branstad, I was just with him earlier this week in Pella, Iowa at a manufacturing forum, and he said that he had tried to persuade an Illinois manufacturer to bring his company and his jobs here to Iowa. And the manufacturer said, I'm not going to come to Iowa. The taxes aren't any cheaper in Iowa than they are in Illinois. I'm going to be going up to Canada because the corporate tax rate is cheaper in Canada than it is here. One thing you have to recognize, it isn't just one person that makes that decision. It's 10,000 business people every day are making these decisions. It isn't that corporations are mean and they don't like America and so they're moving these companies out of the United States. It's the fact that the cost of doing business is extremely high in the United States. When you add, according to the National Association of Manufacturers, when you look at the price of taxes and the price of tort, which is the lawsuit liability, and when you look at the price of energy and the lack of trade opportunities, doing business in the United States as a manufacturer is 20% higher than the rest of the world. That means you have manufacturers fleeing the United States. I want more manufacturing in the United States. That's jobs, good, high-paying jobs. The industry says their average jobs are $77,000 a year. I'd rather have those jobs here in the United States. That's why if we lower the corporate tax burden, If we lower the cost of the regulatory burden, then we'll have more jobs in the United States, and that's what you need after all, are more jobs and higher wages. And that's what I want to make sure that we have in the future, Matt. So thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate your kind attention.